Hi, welcome to Minutes with Mickey. A time for us to wonder about the story Jehoshaphat and Ahab. We find this story in 1 Kings chapter 22 and in 2 Chronicles 17 through 19 verse 23. There are a few things that I have questions about it concerning this story. One is, now we know that Jehoshaphat has become king of Judah, and Ahab is still the king in Israel, and Ahab, of course, we know is an evil and horrible king. Nowhere in the text does it tell us that Jehoshaphat was told by God to enter into a treaty with Ahab. So it just comes out of Jehoshaphat himself. We know that Jehoshaphat was a king who honored God, and that God was with him, and there were some good things about his reign, at least at this point, that we see. But why is it that Jehoshaphat felt that it was important for him to enter into an alliance with Ahab? I would have thought he would have wanted to stay as far away as possible. So it doesn't tell us that God told him to do this. So it made me wonder about perhaps Jehoshaphat took it on himself to try to align the two tribes back together again, the two territories back together again, and yet that wasn't God's plan. The next thing I found really fascinating is that when Ahab says, "Come join me in this battle," that Jehoshaphat says, "Yes, but let's talk to a priest first. Let's get a prophet. Let's get some wisdom here." And so Ahab is able to resurrect 400 prophets. Now, Jezebel's prophets of Baal have just been destroyed, and yet there's these 400 others. So apparently Ahab had so many different gods that he was following, or at least as part of his culture, that there were priests of all different kind. Where did these guys come from? And yet what they told Ahab was that he would be successful in this battle. And then I love the little dialogue when Jehoshaphat says, "No, let's find one more that's really a prophet of God," because he could tell that these were prophets of some other God. And he says, "I want one that's the voice of the Lord." So Micaiah is called into being, and Ahab says, "Well, Micaiah, he never says anything good about me." And then we have this fabulous sarcasm that comes across in Micaiah. He says, "Oh, sure, go ahead, go to battle, you'll be successful." And you can almost feel the sarcasm, because even Ahab says, "See, I told you, this guy, you're not telling the truth because you never say anything good about me." Isn't that interesting that Ahab already knew that it probably wasn't God's will for him to do this, because everyone else said it was, and even when Micaiah said, "Yes, go do it," he knew that was wrong. So what's going on in Ahab? He just wants what he wants, and he wants it when he wants it, similar to what we had discovered in the story with Naboth's vineyard. Well, when Micaiah finally does say, "Well, here's what the Lord says," is that you will not be successful. I know that there is some question about whether or not when Micaiah said that he saw this scene in heaven about God allowing a lying spirit to come into the prophets, that some people say that this was probably just a parable that Micaiah was saying. I wonder about that, because what Micaiah says right off the bat is, "Here is the word of the Lord." And when a prophet usually says those words, it's because they are giving directly that which the Lord has said. So he says, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord has said." And then he says, "And I saw this scene in heaven." Go back to Job chapter 1, around verses 6 through 8, and you'll find that it isn't only God's good angels that show up in the council of the heavens. Sometimes even the demons appear there. We know that even Lucifer showed up there. So take a look at that passage in Job. And so it very well may be, and this is the way I can understand it, is that yes, these other beings were there at this council, and God allowed them to do, in a sense, God's bidding. And God's bidding was to finally teach Ahab his final lesson and have that which was spoken about Ahab actually come true. So when Micaiah finally says, you're going to be destroyed, it's all going to be over, Ahab then is angry, even though he knew this is probably what was going to be said, has Micaiah taken away. And I could almost see it like a scene in a movie when Micaiah is being dragged away and says, if you come back alive, you know that God wasn't speaking to me. But if you're dead, you'll know that it's really true. And it's like he's being dragged, and yet he's still speaking the word of the Lord. Ahab tries to trick the enemy into thinking that he's not even where he's supposed to be. And notice this wonderful thing, that someone shot an arrow at random and it landed in Ahab's chest, in that weakest point of his armor. Ahab was the man who was so evil and who always wanted what he wanted, and he wanted it now, doing it his own way. And yet what we see here is ultimately God's going to do what God's going to do. So the wonder then becomes, what is it that we need to be taking hold of and saying to ourselves, Lord, let me be in your path and not try to surround myself with my own decisions. I think this was something that maybe Jehoshaphat should have learned. It wasn't his own way of doing things. It should have been God's way. What a powerful example for him. What a powerful example for us. Have a great week.